Hey everybody, this is Ryan Schumacher here, presenting my data analysis for my Unit 1 test that I gave to my 8th grade pre-algebra students in one of my class periods. I do plan on using this class actually as part of my action research this year, so I wanted to kind of dive in a little bit deeper to see how the breakdown of each student did, and even the question in this case. So you'll see that there are 18 students in this group, and it's broken down into the 12 questions in each case. A 1 represented that they got a full credit score. If you see the 0.75 here, that means that they got 3 out of 4 correct. Obviously 0.5 is half credit, and then 0.25 is 1 out of 4, and zeros means they got it completely incorrect. In this column here, you'll see the test scores that they got. All right, so ranging from the maximum score of 100 all the way down to the minimum of 62.5%, which is pretty large in this case. With students coming into 8th grade, they do have some experience with solving equations, so one-step, two-step proportions in this case, and some applications along the way. But kind of analyzing this, I broke it down, like I said, into each question. And at the bottom here, you will see the breakdown of each question about the average of how students did. So obviously, question number 1 is a one-step equation where every single student got that correct, which I'm very pleased to see. And as you work your way down, we get into some more challenging questions. Primarily at the end of our test is when we get into some proportions, into some application ideas, so they look to be on the lower end of how students performed. But overall, I would say that I'm fairly pleased with most of the scores. I think there's always a couple outliers here and there in terms of student data, but I think overall, I think the students I've had this year have done a really nice job with the work that they've done. So I kind of broke it down into even over here the letter grades. So most students performed either in the A category or B category. There were a couple of C category students and a few even that scored in the 60s, and that's also broken down in this chart right here, as you can see. But I think really diving into the analysis part and the interpretation part of how the students did was breaking down the types of questions that each one represented. So one-step equations was primarily question 1 here and question 2. So question 1, like I said, everyone had gotten correct, and then question 2 was more of a word problem where they had to select the type of one-step equation that it would represent. So overall, you can see that most students scored either higher towards 100. There's a couple towards the bottom of 62%, but I think by analyzing it and kind of interpreting it, I think it shows that the students understood one-step equations for the most part. There are a couple of outliers, and that might just be coming from the idea that it's not just strictly solving an equation, rather than they have to break down the word problem and kind of pick and choose as to which one is the correct way. And that comes from me as a teacher when I interpret it and I say, okay, did I provide them the right tools? And one tool that we try to use is something called CUBES. It's an acronym that allows students to kind of break down word problems. So I think in analyzing that and looking at it, it shows me that, okay, maybe we need to practice the idea of the word problems a little bit more and not as much as just the rote going through the step-by-step process. So being able to break down a word problem, circling the numbers that are involved in the problem, then underlining the question that they're asking us, and boxing any math words that you might see, and then being able to evaluate and solve it. So that's just something that I would interpret in terms on my point as a teacher. And again, in terms of changing things, I think being able to look at that and say, okay, what worked well and what didn't work well, and obviously the word problems coming into this test was not something that they were strong in. If we look at the multi-step equations, those I flagged both multi-step equations and proportions because that is generally the larger part of the test, and breaking that down for students can definitely be a little bit difficult. If they don't have a background and a basis for one-step equations, it makes it a lot more difficult, obviously, than to do the multi-step equations. But I do believe that with the ability of most of the students having a strong background in one-step equations, two-step equations, and then even three-step equations um, made it easier to solve as long as they kind of followed some of the steps. So the reason I flagged this obviously is because I had a couple of students. One was 65%, one was 55%, and even 50%. So there are definitely some students on the lower end of solving these multi-step equations, and it kind of reflects a little bit. This student scored a 79%, this student scored a 62.5%, and then this student scored a 66%. So it reflects their test grade in terms of, okay, did I provide them maybe that one-on-one attention that they needed, that more concrete ideas rather than the abstract word problems. So I think in terms of the student knowledge and what I would interpret in terms of them, overall, most of them could understand, how to go through a two-step equation. And a lot of it comes down to, once you get past that first step in a two-step equation, it then just turns back into a one-step equation. So can they break it down step by step? And, majority of the students are. There's just a couple of students as outliers that could definitely use a little bit more assistance. In terms of the applications, again, most scored in the 100s. There were only, I think, one or two application problems. Again, a couple of students scored lower. You have a 50%, a 50%, a 25%, and a 62%. And, this one's actually kind of interesting to interpret and analyze because the 50% up here scored an 87 overall, the 25% here scored a 62, and this 62 scored an 85 overall. So it doesn't exactly reflect, are the lower students performing lower in those categories. Is actually showing that, maybe there's a discrepancy among higher students and lower students. So I think being able to look at that and say, okay, what could I change about my teaching that might assist them a little bit more in the application process? And I think what I can do, going forward is being able to really bring in the acronym that I was talking about before, the cubes idea, so that they can kind of see what's going on. Can they pull out information that they need, pull out information that they wouldn't need that could affect them in this case. And then lastly, proportions. I highlighted that because there was a significant group of students that needed it. We have 66% here. I should change that real quick. And then that's 50% here, 58%, 58, 41, 66. So there's a larger group of students that struggle with the proportions in this case. And that again is a reflection on, okay, maybe we needed to practice this more. I think, being able to break that down and see what we were doing would allow them to obviously see it in a better format. But overall, I think the data kind of shows me that, there's definitely some students that know how to do it really well, and there's definitely some students that struggled in this case. But I think the most important thing for me going forward has been, okay, how can I, intertwine what we're doing in this first unit into the other units? Because, solving equations is really going to break down into every single unit that we do in some way, shape, or form. So I think, being able to analyze that has actually allowed me to see it in a different limelight a little bit, in a positive manner, so that when I get to, slope in a couple of weeks, it allows me to kind of see, okay, what can I do in this unit that might help them better than it was in the first unit that we were doing. So overall, I think I liked it a lot. It kind of let me see how one broke down. I think I might go back at some point when I get some more time to do the rest of my units and in this nature, because I think it is really important for myself to kind of break all of these down. So I'm interested to see how you guys view it, and thanks.